Hi everyone. Now, 2 or 3 weeks ago, I made a video tutorial on the subject of controlling the wash. And in the process of doing that, I mentioned that I would then do a painting or demonstration of a painting where I would revisit some of those ideas, some of the things that we looked at, and see how they play out in the context of a proper painting as opposed to just the exercises that we looked at the time. So the demonstration that I've painted for you is a scene on the shore of Poole Harbour in Dorset. Beautiful scene, lovely place to paint. It's a good subject as well for you to have a go at. And what I've done is I've put reference image and also a link to the sketch that I've used in the video description. Please feel free to download them, print them off, use them, have a go at it yourself. And also post your results and tag me in because I'd love to see them. It's always exciting to see people trying to have a go and getting better at what they're doing. And if I can give you some help as you go through that process, then that's my pleasure. So I've done that painting and it's quite a lengthy demonstration because what I've tried to do as much as possible is not to skip anything. You get to see, apart from one little glitch where I had a problem with the memory card, you get to see the whole painting from start to finish. And I'm afraid you're going to have to listen to me explaining pretty much every single thing I'm doing, but I'm hoping that you'll find it helpful. And one of the reasons I wanted to do it was to start to address this idea of control within watercolor, because I'm becoming increasingly convinced that it really does lie at the heart of becoming a successful watercolor painter. Now, I know this from learning years ago how to paint watercolor and can identify with these issues and these challenges. And the best way to put it is this, really, that in terms of learning how to paint in watercolor, you need to master the ability to control what you're doing. That's very important. But there comes a tipping point where you then need to learn how to relinquish some of that control in order to achieve paintings that have a nice quality and a nice feel to them. And that freshness and looseness as well that you often see with really, really good watercolor paintings. And so at the heart of watercolor, there's always this tension between the need to technically control what you're doing, but then aesthetically to surrender some control. And those two are, to a certain extent, in conflict. So what happens is that you start to paint, you learn how to do things, you gain the skills and the familiarity with your paint, your paper, your brushes, and then you sort of get to a brick wall that you can't get past because your paintings are starting to look a little bit tight and technical and a little heavy and laboured. And you think, well, that's odd because I seem to have really got the hang of this technically. And it's at that point you need to start losing a little bit of control. And you can do that because at that point you've got a grounding in the skills and the techniques that you need. Here's the scene that I want to paint. It's a scene of Poole Harbour. I'm looking across it towards one of the small islands that are dotted in various places around the harbour. Purbeck Hills are in the background, and I'm standing at a place called Shipstal Point, which is on the edge of Arne Peninsula, which is part of Arne Nature Reserve. Beautiful place, and it's quiet in this part of the harbour. There's very little commercial activity and lots of wildlife. It's just a wonderful place to be. But before I get started on this, I need to make some decisions, and it's the first important step in any painting. Before you go near your piece of paper, make sure that you have decided in your mind exactly what you want to do. And the first thing that needs consideration here is the sky, because as it is in the picture, well, it's not an interesting sky by any stretch of the imagination. We've got this funny cloud at the top, that's going to have to go. Then we're largely left with a flat blue sky. Is that what we want to work with? For me, no, not so much, because funnily enough, as I was walking back to the car, I noticed some wispy clouds quite high up in the sky. I thought, do you know what, they'd look nice just across the top of the island. They'd look really, really good in a summer scene like this. So that's helped me resolve the sky. The second thing is that the foreground area here, to me, it's just got too much space in. So these areas of marram grass and reeds here, I'm going to reduce that quite significantly and bring the shoreline lower down in the picture. You'll also see there's a couple of little boats at the end of the jetty. I'm going to put a couple more in, and the reason for that is, firstly, they're often there, and it looks rather nice with a couple of little white pleasure craft in the harbour. Putting one in front of the island is very important, just because it will break up that solid mass of dark green trees in the middle distance. So I'm going to do that too. So having made those decisions with regard to the sky, the foreground, putting the boats in, the next thing to do, of course, is a little tonal sketch, and I've just mapped out some simple tones here. So a few things to note, one of which is the sky. Again, I'm going from sort of blue with white streaky clouds coming across it, and then I want the blue to become very, very pale as I work down towards the horizon. And instead of having lighter clouds against a darker tone in the sky, I'm going to have a lighter area of sky at the bottom with just a couple of darker clouds across it. And that tonal counter change, it's rather nice, and try and get that into your paintings as much as you possibly can. I've got another tonal counter change just along the distant shoreline here. Just between this island here and the one that's out of the picture on the left, there's a small area of marshland that links the two at low tide, and I want that to be quite bright and tonally lighter than the sea and lighter than the distant hills. But on this side, I'm looking for the reverse, so I'm going to have paler area of water here. I've got paler sky above it largely, and I will have a darker shoreline here, and this little promontory here will be darker too. Also, that little boat there is darker against the lighter water. Here we have lighter boats against darker water. So I've played around with the tonal counter change, and it just helps to create visual interest in the painting. And then down in the bottom corner here I have this darker tone on the reeds and grasses, which balances nicely against the darkness of the island in the middle distance. I'm reminded to keep the beach tonally very pale, and also I want to keep these, there's a couple of little houses here on the edge of the island. I want to keep those as pale as possible so they're catching the light, and again making a nice strong contrast against the trees behind them. I've used my reference images, I've used my recollections of being at Shipstal Point last summer. I've created a sketch which has helped me to resolve the decisions that I needed to make, and I can't emphasize enough how important that is, before you get stuck into your painting. But I've resolved those now, and so I think we're ready to start. First place to start is the sky, as it is on the vast majority of the landscapes that I paint. And so what I'm going to do is wet the whole area of the sky with this Harbour brush. It seems to have picked up a huge amount of hairs for some reason. Not quite sure what that's being used for. Never mind. And I'm going to wet this whole area so that I can work wet into wet. And because I don't have an image that I'm working from, it's rather nice because I can just see what's happening on the paper in front of me. I know roughly where I'm going with this. I've sketched out the type of sky that I want. I have a strong recollection of what the sky was like on the day, even though it's not quite the one in the picture that I took. Plus, I have endless images in my mind that I can draw on for reference if I need to. That's just from being outdoors a lot. You observe things, you remember them, and use them. So I'm coming down just to the waterline here, and I will let that dry up a little bit before I paint into it. As you can see on my palette here, I've already mixed up the colours I want. There's only two colours at this stage in the sky. I'll put a little bit of shadow in, but it's going to be the warm ultramarine blue at the top, and then I'm going to go down into a paler cerulean as I work down towards the horizon. Now, I can already hear you saying, look, you should never use more than one blue in a painting, or one version of a primary in a painting. There is a good principle behind that, but you don't need to make it into a rule. I often use a number of different primaries in the same painting, and yeah, let's not make rules. If it's something that achieves the result you want, then do it. And in this case, I need to be able to cool this blue down significantly as I work down towards the horizon. Now, it's very wet down at the bottom, as you can see here, and it's starting to dry towards the top. We covered this when we were looking at controlling the wash. And what it means is that I can start working now at the top here and move all the way down the paper. I'm going into the ultramarine, and by painting wet into wet like this, you see you have this wonderful coverage of paint. It just goes on beautifully. And then for my wispy clouds, I'm leaving areas of white paint. Not of white paint, what am I talking about? White paper. And I'm just remembering what I saw at the time. That's okay. Now I'm going to rinse the brush out, and I'm dampening it out on my cloth. If you remember, we talked about blending. Now what I'm going to do is remove some of these feathering marks, and each time you do it, take what you pick up off the brush otherwise you're putting down blue paint back into your painting. And I'm slightly lifting out some of this paint as well, which just softens the transition from the paper that I've left to the fainter clouds here. Do you see? I didn't clean my brush out there, and I've put a mark there, but that's okay. You know, I'm not copying anything, so I can just deal with it as and when it crops up and make a decision as I'm painting. Is that something I like, or is that something that's a problem? And deal with it accordingly. But I'm not I'm not looking at anything at the moment. I'm not copying anything. And I'm just going with what's happening on the paper in front of me. Now, let's start putting in this cooler cerulean blue, and it's paler as well. I don't want it to be as strong tonally as the ultramarine. And I want some of it to run into the ultramarine as well. Let's mix it up a little bit. And I might leave a little white cloud down in the bottom corner there. And you can see, hopefully, working like this on a large area of the sky here, working wet into wet, you've got a lot more time. Things are not drying on you as quickly. You can paint freely with a lot of confidence up to the point, and we discussed this last time, that it starts to become unmanageable. I'm just going to need to bring that down a bit further, but you can see what's happening here, hopefully. There's a large bead of clear water, which was from the initial wetting of the paper. I'm just going to take that off, otherwise I'll have a very dark band of paint that just ends up collecting at the bottom, or on the shoreline I should say. So take that out with a damp brush. It'll still keep running down onto that area because it's damp, but you just don't want so much paint there. And I'm just going to, with a damp brush, I'm just going to continue doing a little bit more blending up here. Not too much. And then I'm going to put a little bit more ultramarine right at the top of the sky, just to have that stronger colour tone at the top. Now the sky area is still wet enough at the bottom here for me to put in some of these darker clouds that I mentioned, and I need this to be reasonably concentrated, and so I'm mixing up some ultramarine, cadmium red, a little bit of yellow ochre, and that just gives me a warm grey that I can then put into the sky at the bottom here. And I don't want too many clouds like this, but I'll just have one running across here like this. It looks very dark at the moment, but don't worry too much about that. It's going to dry up, and it needs to look that dark when you put it on. Otherwise, it's just going to run everywhere, which again is something that we looked at when we did our tutorial on controlling the wash. So you can see it's feathering there, so I can get rid of that again with some blending. So I'll just wash my brush out. It's damp, and I can run that through that area. Smooth out that shape. And that is achieving the effect that I want of some cloud shadow towards the horizon, dark against light compared with light against dark at the top here. Now there we are, there's the sky done, but I just want to make a couple of adjustments to it, and you can do this with skies. You don't have to do them all in one go. I've now let this dry completely. As this was drying up and as I was putting these clouds in here, I then thought, actually I want the cloud going out the top of the paper, so I wiped out this area here as it was drying up. That's fine. But in the process, this had become too dry to work on through the middle here, and so I've sort of got this feeling of white cloud running through the top half of the painting. And then I like these darker clouds here, but there's a gap here. So I want to close that gap up. And the way I'm going to do that is just to bring a little bit more of the grey cloud, be it a bit fainter, just through here. Now, because this is all dried, if I paint on it now, I'm going to have a crisp, hard edge to the cloud. We don't want that. Because it's dry, you can re-wet this area and work on it wet into wet again. To do that, you have to have a very, very soft brush. This Harke brush is perfect for it. You need crystal clear water, and you need to make sure that when you put it on with the lightest of touches. It's no good scrubbing it as if you're trying to clean your kids' shoes when they've decided to come home from school through the woods, right? Because you'll disturb everything underneath. So put it on gently with a soft brush, re-wet the whole area so you don't get a mark if it picks up any residual pigment, which you can do from time to time. Put it on like that, nothing's been disturbed, and it's wet and ready to go again. The advantage of doing this is that you're now painting with far less risk than you were first time round. And the reason for that is any paint that you put onto this area now doesn't have to counteract any other pigment. It's all dried. It's just water that you're painting into. So the issues of timing and getting runbacks have started to recede because the only thing that you're going to be dislodging is the clear water. It's a sort of risk-free way of doing skies, if you like. And you can now embellish what you've done without worrying about, is it too dry? Am I going to have runbacks and that type of thing? It's quite a nice way to work. I'm just going to pick up a bit more ultramarine and go darker through here. You see, when I put this on, like I said, it's only running into water. There's no other wet paint that it might be disturbing, so I am not going to get a runback. Bit darker through there, that's quite nice. And then we go into this grey colour again, and I don't want it too dark, but I just want something through here that moves us away from this idea that there's that band running through the middle of the painting, which is a bit distracting. And this could also be shadow underneath this area of cloud here. Nice. Damp brush. Blend. And I think that's all I'm going to do in the sky. Let me just close that gap up down there. And I do this an awful lot with my skies. I often get 95% of it done first time round. So, in fact, quite often 100% of it done. But sometimes I will let it dry, and then you can re-wet the area, and you're effectively fine-tuning it. You're just enhancing little areas with minimal risk, without disturbing any paint that's there. And I'm happy with that. That's a nice sky, and it captures exactly what I was hoping for. Darker tones against white clouds, coming down into a lighter, cooler sky closer to the horizon, where there's some tonal counterchange. This time we've got darker clouds going across the paler ground, as they call it in the art world. Now, while this edge is wet along here, I'm going to continue to do a little bit of work. Not much, but like I said, this area here, it's a little bit of marsh that connects these, I say there's an island here, but connects these two islands at low tide. And I want that to show as nice and bright green. So I'm going to get some raw sienna and just go straight into the ultramarine that's already on the palette. And I'm going to drop that in at the bottom there. Remember, because this is wet, I'm mixing colour that I think is going to be too strong. Because I'm painting it into water, and that area there is wet, it has the effect of diluting this. So let's run it from, it runs along here. The reason I'm doing this is that when I paint the top of the hill, which you can see is darker, I can stop without having to match up an edge that's already there if I just painted this wet onto dry. So that's the sort of green colour I'm looking for. I'll run the damp brush through it and get rid of most of those blooms running up there. And that's important, that bright green along the waterline there will make a nice contrast against the hill behind it that's darker. Always keep an eye out when you're painting for things that you could be doing with areas that are still workable, but remember not to force that issue, otherwise you then get into trouble with runbacks and other such horrors. I'm going to put the area of beach in now, and what I want to do is make sure that on the top here it has a soft edge, and underneath it has a soft edge as well, so that when I paint the darker values of the sea and the grass next to it, I'm not having to match up hard edges. Working from light to dark allows you to do that. So I'm just going to get some clear water and paint around, very approximately, where that area of beach wants to start and finish. I don't mind the fact that it's going to run up a little bit. In fact, I will start it up in the area of water, because then when I paint the water over the top once it's all dried, whoops, then it'll be a slightly different colour to what I've painted above it, and you get that sense that you're coming close to the shore, that you're starting to see some of the land just disappearing beneath the surface of the water. So I'll paint that wet there, and then I'll paint it wet underneath here too. So just let that run down into there. That's fine. And then I've mixed up a colour, a warm colour here of raw sienna. It's got a little bit of cadmium red in it. It's got a little bit of ultramarine, just to sort of take away from the orange nature of that. And I'm, like I said, I'm going to run that up into that area of water there. And then paint across the rest of the area in this very pale colour, because this is tonally a very pale part of the painting. Now what I'm going to do here, I can't see any stones and pebbles on the beach, but I know they're there, okay? So leave some of these broken edged areas as you're painting along. They're not in the scene that you're looking at directly, but it's important to leave areas like this in watercolour. They give your paintings an awful lot of character, and you're using your experience of being there. You knew when you were down on that beach that you weren't standing on something that was a uniform colour. It had all manner of things on it, little seashells, type of thing. So leave these broken areas. Don't worry about them. Don't try and paint them out. They're very important. You don't want too much of them. You don't want to overdo it, but you need to have something in there just to add a little bit of texture, a little bit of visual interest. And as you can see, I'm running up still into this wet area of sea. That's good. I'm also just going to drop in some mucky grey that's left on the palette from the sky. Again, I don't know where, it's not really there, but it just helps to break up the flatness of the colour that was there, and I like that. And this is the thing with painting, you just don't have to copy all the time what's in front of you. You're creating this image, you see, so you've got room to express yourself. It's still wet enough for me to be able to work something into it, so I'm just going to get a little bit of yellow ochre and a little bit of ultramarine, quite concentrated, with my rigger brush. And I showed you how to do this in our controlling the wash video. I'm just going to wait for this to dry up even further and then suggest a few little pieces of marron grass or reeds that are growing out of the beach here, because I don't want all of these boundaries and edges here to all be hard. I want some soft ones in there too. Left the brush, did you see that? I left the brush on far too long and it's pulled out most of the paint, but that's okay, I can make something out of that. It's not necessarily in the painting, but it's happened. Let's live with it. Let's turn it into a little area of grass that's growing on the beach. Don't be afraid of watercolour. Just there, it did what it wanted to do. It decided to have everything that was in the rigger because I left it there for too long. Doesn't matter. Let it do that. Just react to it. And the reason I can react to it is I'm not looking at the image in front of me. I know that there's beach here with bits of grass growing across it. It doesn't really matter that those areas of grass don't resemble precisely what you're putting down onto the painting. So I'm going to put the sea in now, and I want it paler on this side and darker on this side. I've got a pale wash of ultramarine mixed up there for that side. More ultramarine, it's darker for this side, but I've got a little bit more raw sienna in there as well, just to give it a slightly greeny feel. And I'm going round these boats, leaving those white and providing a crisp edge along the top of the beach there. So let's get that in. Now I'm happy painting up to the edge here, because when I paint the hill down, it doesn't matter too much to me whether these overlap and I get a little hard edge where they do, because that happens at shorelines. There's all manner of stuff on the shoreline that creates that type of look. So don't be too worried about it in certain parts of your painting. I need to be careful here because there's a couple of little white boats just there. And this is quite tricky. Normally I would turn the board up and do a graded wash from dark to light, but I find that difficult while filming, so I'm going to have to work very quickly here and move across the paper which is a little bit unusual because I normally, and you should too, work from top to bottom using the slope of the board. I want this edge here to be lost. I'll show you why in due course. So I'll just paint water into that while it's still very wet. Now I want to go into my darker mix of blue. I've got to keep this edge going. If this dries, then I've had it. Let's come around this boat quickly. There's another one there. I'm using plenty of paint here. And I've got the same issue here. I don't mind a little bit of overlap along that edge. It could be anything. Now I'm not leaving white flecks in this, which is unlike the seas that I usually paint, because I want to leave it flat. It suggests that there's virtually no breeze at all. I've come down and created that edge against the beach now. I'm just going to run a damp brush along the bottom edge there to take that out, and that's fine. That's rendered that area. Now I'll just go back over here, and the reason why I dampened that edge was because I want to put some green onto this sort of little area here where it meets the water, and again I want just one edge. That would be fairly rough, and maybe there's a broken edge there. Then trying to match that around a blue shape, it's never going to happen. So paint it out, leave it soft, and then when you put a hard edge of green over the top, you won't have a problem. Now, what I like here is the yellow that I painted into the clear water a short while ago is now starting to come through the blue wash that's been put over the top. So you have that feeling that as water is getting close to you, it's becoming shallower. And watercolor is great for this. You see, its transparency naturally lends itself to these type of effects. Now I want to create some foreground texture here in the grass, and at the moment the paper here is largely unpainted, and it's perfect for doing areas of dry brushing, broken edged areas, because the paper is at its most resistant to the paint before it's been painted on. It's just the way that the paper's made without getting into too many details. So it's a good opportunity to put in some textured areas, because they're not easy to do. This just makes it a bit easier for you. So I'm going to show you how to do that. And I'm doing this knowing that I'm going to glaze over the top of it. What I've painted will show through, but it will be slightly softened by the glaze that I put on top, and it creates a rather nice subtle textured effect in the foreground. Now in this bottom right hand corner, I want there to be some areas of longer grass, which is largely because the grass is closer to us. So from a point of view of perspective, that's a good thing to do. I've got a sort of mucky green, which is yellow ochre and ultramarine, and I'm just going to dry brush this on as if it's grass, clumps of grass, little tufts growing up here. I don't want to be uniform with this at all. It's very important that you break this up. That's good. And now with a damp brush, just get in amongst it and start to soften off some of the edges and others not so much, and you have this sort of nice uneven mess, and that's exactly what it looks like at the moment. You'll be thinking, my goodness, it's just ruined it. But you'll see that these areas become incredibly useful as the painting goes on, and then as we get further away from this corner, I'm going to just suggest a bit more texture along here, and I'm holding the brush horizontal to the paper, parallel to the paper I should say, and again just letting it hit and miss. And these broken areas will show through what I'm going to put over the top of it. It's good. Again, soften off some of it, others not so much. And I'm doing this because I know this technique works. I'm not copying. I'm still not looking at what's in front of me. I'm just looking at the painting and what the painting needs more than what the scene in front of me does. I know this is broken sort of rough grass area, and this type of treatment is going to work. You just can't capture it as it is unless you're painting, ultra realism. But we'd be here for, well, we wouldn't be here for weeks, we'd be here for months, if that's what I wanted to do, or if that's how I chose to paint. And I like this way of working. It suits the medium. It suits the unpredictability and the stubborn nature of watercolor. And I'm controlling it, but it's also kind of getting its own way as well. And I rather like that. Now I've got a dark color here that I'm just going to drop in places as well. It's just my usual shadow color, which is ultramarine and cadmium red. And you'll see when I glaze over this, all your concerns will have gone. Don't brush again. Some hard edges, some soft edges. Looks messy. Looks like I've gone wrong. It'll all come together. Get your finger in there if you need to. It's really good way of softening things up. There was a little edge developing there, which would have been fine, but it didn't suit my pedantic nature, so I've decided to get rid of it. Yeah, you can do that. Fingers are useful for that. So now I have this area dry, I can glaze over the top of it. And what you need to make sure is that you've got bags of liquid paint for this, because you don't want to be scrubbing around too much, otherwise you will start to disturb what you've painted. Even though it's dry, you will do that if you're too aggressive with your brush strokes. So let's just get a nice amount of wet paint here on the palette. This is raw sienna that I'm mixing with French ultramarine. Now I'm using raw sienna, not yellow ochre, even though they are very, very similar colours, because it is far more transparent than yellow ochre. And I want this work that we've done to show through. So yellow ochre, being more opaque, will have a role to play later in the painting. But for now, I want this to be nice and transparent. Now what I'm going to do, and I do this from time to time, I'm just going to put a little bit of sap green in here. It just takes away the sort of browny nature of raw sienna as a yellow. I like it. I like the greens, the sunlit greens that it makes, but sometimes it just needs a little bit of a helping hand. So a tiny little bit of sap green in there doesn't hurt. And I'm also going to refresh the shadow colour that I've got on the palette here as well, because I'm going to need some of that too. Now what I can do is completely define this area here in the foreground. I'm going to want to run it up to sort of where this soft-edged grass is, and I want to paint it in such a way that there'll be some broken edges in there as well. And you've just got to, with areas like this, you've just got to be confident and use plenty of paint. Tonally, I want that a bit darker there, so I'll add some of that shadow colour as well. And I'm painting down the page so that I've always got a wet edge here that I can work with. That's very important. See that little edge there? Leave it. Don't paint it out. They are not necessarily the easiest things to achieve. And when you get one in an area that could use it, keep an eye on what you're doing and leave them there. Like that. Just let it be there. Whether or not you think it should be there or not. It's just grass growing across a beach, and it looks great when you can achieve areas like that. Let some of the wash that you put down here show through. It adds interest and texture to what you're doing. Keep this wet, this edge, keep it coming down the paper. It's slightly tricky this because I'm working across at the same time. Got a green blob in the sea now, but let's take care of that. So yeah, let's connect up to there. Keep this wet, keep it coming down the paper, but don't start scrubbing, otherwise you'll really lose what you've done underneath. Yeah, let's keep that. Shadow in here just stops it becoming a monotonous area of green. Now I'm going to put more raw sienna into this as I paint over the top here, because I can see when I refer to my reference photos that there seems to be a slightly drier, sandier area along here. Let's try and capture that. I'm going to get the rigger brush now and make a very dark mix of green, and I'm using yellow ochre now, because yellow ochre grips really well when I work wet into wet. I'll show you what I mean by that. When I put this into a wet area, it will not spread out as much as if I'm using raw sienna, and that's what I want at the moment. I'm just defining darker areas here while this is still damp. Remember, we can't do this when it's too wet, otherwise these dark edges will just get lost. We can't do it if this paint, this green paint that I'm putting on now, is too dilute, or we'll have runbacks. But now is the perfect time to do it, and the paint is a perfect consistency, and yellow ochre is a perfect pigment for it because it wants to largely stay where you put it. Don't want to overwork this area at this stage, but while it's still damp, there's an opportunity here to create more texture, albeit very subtly. And we don't want too much information in the foreground here, but we still want a sense that there's longer grass growing, reeds. And we can put a little bit more detail over the top of this in due course once it's dry. But while it's wet, it's nice to build up this sense of texture with soft edges, which you get when you can work wet into wet. Put something there, because then that allows me to make a connection into this area here. And while you've still got these colours on the palette, make use of them. And I often leave this to the detail stage of the painting, but the colours there, I'm working in this area, so it doesn't matter as long as you don't get too carried away. To just pick up some of this colour and add in a little bit of hard edge detail to the beach. Just extend this area out onto the beach. Be careful with it, be delicate, don't overwork this because it will look awful if you do. Keep it subtle. Just a little suggestion with the same colour. And then what I'm doing is creating a contrast between little sharp areas of detail that your eye picks up and tells you that there's grass growing onto the beach here. But you only need to do that in places. Don't do it everywhere. We've suggested there's some longer grass in the foreground with that use of dry brushing and then glazing over the top. So we've got this soft, subtle texture of grass there. You don't really need to do any more than that in an area such as this that is, it's by and large, it's a supporting area of the painting. Now that area is all dry, so let's put in this, I don't really know what it is, it's just another area of land further away that juts out into the harbour here. I want this to be slightly darker. I'm just imagining it's under the cloud shadow, and tonally I want it to register as darker against the sea around it. So I'm going to make a slightly cooler and darker green. I've got my shadow colour, which I'll use as well. And as I did previously, I'm just going to put this in. Now, I don't want to be quite as fussy as I was down here, because this is further away, so the eye's ability to pick up detail recedes somewhat. There's a little area here I can see that seems to fall away. It's quite nice. Let's change colour. Just drop something else in there. Just makes it a little more interesting. Just keep changing it up, and this is why it pays, you see, to have plenty of room to keep these colours alive on your palette. It becomes more difficult if you're working with a small little well of paint. I'm just warming this up a bit here as we come through towards the end. That's a little, even though it's very subtle, there's a little broken edge there. I'm going to leave that because it looks nice. It's not copying what's in front of me. I'm just responding to what's happening on the paper. There we are. Now I can go back to the rigger, and I'm going to work up some darker colour here and just drop it in to create an edge to this bank here. There's also one that runs through there. Something like that. And then on this side, again, I want this just to be falling into a little bit of shadow here. It gives this area a bit of form. It stops it from looking as though you've cut something out of cardboard and stuck it in the middle of the painting. It's quite important. Let's just have a little more dark green on this edge too. That's working quite nicely. There's a darker little edge to the sort of marshland here. But I'm going to put that in when that's dry, so I've got a crisp edge to that. I'm going to mix up a dark colour here of burnt sienna and ultramarine. I didn't intend on using this, so I would have squeezed some fresh paint out, but hey, not to worry. And again, I'm just going to pick up little areas along here. Going back to our controlling the wash video again, you can see here it's just bleeding up into what I've painted, and that's because it's almost dry. I can see that the shine has gone off this, but there's just a little sheen to it. It's still damp, and I know I can get away with a little definition here that's just going to bleed up into what I've painted, and it works perfectly because I'm getting a crisp edge along the bottom here where the land meets the sea, and then on the top it's just blending into what's already there. Now, if I did that all the way along, it would look awful. I'm deliberately not doing it all the way along so that your eye doesn't meet a solid line defining this edge. Think about things like that. They're compositional tricks that often get overlooked, and sometimes you can work through an area like that and go, yeah, I need a bit there, a little bit there, a little bit there. Before you've done it, you've got this dark line going across your painting, and it all looks rather obvious and not ideal. Now the tip on this little point here is actually quite dark, and I like the fact that it registers strongly against the sea there. It makes it lovely and crisp. I'm going to put in the distant hills, or actually I should say the edge of Poole Harbour to the left-hand side of Round Island here. It is round, and rather unimaginatively it has been called Round Island. Now, just off the left of the picture here is a longer island. It's called, wait for it, it's called Long Island, would you believe it? There's no Hamptons on it, by the way. There's probably one house, and I think that's about it. But yeah, lack of creativity really in the island naming department. The Round Island is Round Island. The Long Island is Long Island. Incidentally, there's another one called Green Island, and well, you figure out the rest. Anyway, let's put these distant hills in. I'm going to use a nice cool colour here. Almost, well, it is blue to be honest, but I'm mixing in a bit of yellow and a bit of grey because I want that area, even though it's dark, to sit in the distance. And I'm going to start it off from the left-hand side of the island. I'm not worried about there being two edges there because the trees on that island are so dark. That's no problem at all. We can go over the top of that. Just suggest a slight undulation or bit of texture to the top because it is tree lined or wooded, and that's why it has that particular shape. There's something over there on the bank. I'm not sure what it is. I'm going to leave it like that, just so it's there. And again, keep that top edge broken to an extent, and you don't want too much. If I sort of dry brushed along there and had a lovely sort of dry brush stroke, broken edge, it probably be too much detail for that area. Now, you can see I'm leaving this pale area here, painting down to it, but leaving some, which is that area of marsh that joins the two islands together. But I want some of it to almost disappear. Don't want it all to be, as we had here, one sort of long line. Let's vary it up a little bit. Now here it just starts to break up a little, and I'm going to go into some green here, just where the sun might be catching it on this side here. Let's just keep it like that. And then as that dries, in fact now I'm just going to take away a little of the pigment in places, just to vary it up so we haven't got it all as a hard edge. Use your finger again if you have to. And that's nice. I don't need to do anything else in that area of the painting. I've got the dark woodland on the bank, far bank, registering against the pale area of marshland between the two islands. I've varied it up along here, which I like. That's all I need to do.